Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to be guiding you through the latest FedRAMP 20x changes and showing you how to trade heavy compliance paperwork for automated provenance. Before we begin, let's just cover some quick housekeeping. First, please note all participant lines are muted. However, we do encourage participation. So questions will be accepted throughout the session. Please use the Q&A panel. And then finally, you don't need to worry about catching every detail in this deck, as you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording and the slides. We have a great lineup of speakers for you today. Joining us from Anchore is Josh Bressers, VP of Security. We're also joined by two experts from InfusionPoints, Tanner Bailey, an Associate and 20x Compliance Lead, and Alex Erhardt, an Associate 20x Engineering Lead. Thank you all for being here today. And with that, I'll hand you over to Josh to get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Shazane. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm really excited for today. We're going to talk about a lot of the FedRAMP 20x changes. I'm gonna learn a ton. So that's like always my favorite kind of webinar. So let's do some intros first. I'm going to kind of go in the order I have on my screen here. So Tanner, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us, kind of what you're doing, explain a little bit about Infusion Points, and then we'll let Alex go, and then I'll clean up at the end.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Josh, and thanks Anchore for hosting. We're very excited to talk about 20x. We've been doing it a lot lately. But my role from the advisory team here at Infusion Points is to support our customers from a customer relationship, customer success perspective, as well as working with guys like Alex and our engineering, cloud operations, and security operations teams to help our customers succeed in whatever way that is. Sometimes it's documentation development. With 20x, it's not documentation development. It's automated evidence collection, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and really anything and everything in between. Also, our internship coordinator, wear a couple other hats related to some in-house stuff. But really, Infusion Points, the name Infusion Points is the idea of infusing security into every part of your business. And so, we're a security shop first, so that's not changed. But we also understand that there is a big business driver in pursuing federal compliance regulations and accreditations. So that's where a lot of our business is involved in, is helping our customers get compliance with things like FedRAMP 20x being the new shiny thing on the market, but then also FedRAMP Provision 5, CMMC, GovRAMP, and we do some DoD/DOW work as well. And then we also work with smaller government entities like county government, stuff like that, and then work with some commercial entities as well for general security. Because, like I said, we started as a security shop. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my background in Infusion Points as a whole. Alex, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Like was mentioned, my name is Alex Erhardt. I've worked for Infusion Points for going on 7-8 years now. I am the 20x engineering lead, but I also, like Tanner, wear many hats. I help deploy all of our SIM technology, login infrastructure for our customers, and then, of course, develop the KSI Lambda checks that we'll talk about later.
Hey, what is KSI? I'm gonna hold you guys
security
to
indicators.
Okay, I know there's gonna be a lot of acronyms today, and I'm gonna ask what they all are, just because I know what this is like. Okay, and then I'm Josh. I'm the vice president of security here at Anchore. I do all kinds of crazy security stuff, everything from some of the security of our product to helping customers deploy the software and become compliant. My team handles the compliance at Anchore that we have. We have a lot of customers using Anchore Enterprise for FedRAMP compliance. So this is where I'm excited to learn, because obviously I need to understand 20x so I can help the customers out. So let's just kind of hop right into this and we'll get going. So I wanted to kind of start out with the timeline, and I'll let Tanner and Alex, you guys can maybe argue amongst yourselves how you want to start this. But let's just explain kind of what's happening, because I think unlike a traditional FedRAMP rollout, this one is very phased. Whereas I think in the past it's been, oh, here's a new FedRAMP, good luck. You've got 6 months or a year, have at it. And that's not kind of how this is working.
Yeah, so Alex, I'll start and I'll kick it to you, and would love anything that think I miss or other things that are important. But
yeah, go for it.
So big key for 20x is kind of understanding the why. As I talk about the phases, I want to really break down the why FedRAMP 20x is a thing. So last year with the introduction of the new administration, there was a big push for efficiency inside of the federal government. I think anybody that's been paying attention to the federal space will see that and has been likely affected by it, for better or for worse. So that also affected FedRAMP and FedRAMP. The PMO themselves. When we say the PMO, we mean the FedRAMP Program Management Office. So when we say the PMO, we're referring to FedRAMP as an entity. They were among the first to tell everyone that FedRAMP as a process was broken. And what we mean by that is that the time to market and the investment to market was brutal and not sustainable for companies. So FedRAMP, the FedRAMP Authorization Act makes it to where working with federal agencies, to be on federal contracts, FedRAMP became law, for better or worse way of describing it. So to get into that federal market, you have to have FedRAMP accreditation, and part of the FedRAMP accreditation, or excuse me, FedRAMP certification / authorization, part of that process was having an agency sponsor. But long and short of it, over time, as the FedRAMP process kind of evolved and as case law began to get established, as it always does in federal processes, a lot of agencies would require, it became a chicken and an egg issue. We're getting a federal agency to sponsor you through the FedRAMP process. They would require things like FedRAMP Ready, which is a lower level of accreditation. So basically, because of a bunch of issues of it being too expensive to get into FedRAMP and taking too long to get into FedRAMP because of processes like the FedRAMP PMO review process, you would go through all of this effort to get your FedRAMP assessment, get listed on the marketplace, and then you'd be stuck in the review queue with the PMO for 12 to 18 months in some cases. And that wasn't just edge cases. That was not uncommon. So you could spend 2 years and bukus of money basically and not have any return on investment from a federal contract. So 20X has been a big push from the federal government to fix this problem, and it's a big problem. So they said, instead of us, we have ideas, let's put them through some pilot processes. So that's what you've got here on the slide. Here is we are currently, FedRAMP Phase 2, 20X Phase 1 was the initial list of the key security indicators, and really a test run with, a couple of, innovators, one of which was InfusionPoints. We were part of that first cohort of FedRAMP pilot authorized services, our XPU40 security platform. I was one of the first cohort. And so basically during that process, we were figuring out what a KSI is in comparison to a security control in the old Red 5 way of doing things, or even the current Red 5 way of doing things, because Red 5 is still moving forward. So that was all Phase 1. There was Phase 1 authorized pilot cohort members, and then we've moved into Phase 2, which is wrapping up basically as we speak, where they introduced the FedRAMP moderate KSI baseline, an alpha, and then they released a beta a couple months later, and kind of finalized what the assessment process was going to look like. So, as a part of that phase, we went through and designed some KSI validations. We'll talk about what that means here in a few minutes. Had that assessed by a 3PAO, a third-party assessment organization. And then that 3PAO assessment and their notes were provided to the FedRAMP PMO, and their assessment team went through and basically designated that, InfusionPoints is FedRAMP program authorized at the moderate level or the Class C level. And then on the right, you'll see, there's Phase 3, which is going to be wide-scale adoption with agencies. So agencies have not adopted this yet, and that's the phase that we're currently getting ready to move into, is that, we're going to figure out how agencies adopt all this as a part of their ATO process, their authority to operate process, because that's not changing. A federal agency, CISO's office, still has to provide an ATO to your system. FedRAMP is just helping streamline that process. And then we'll move into next year and we'll work on, the high pilot for FedRAMP High. And then in Phase 5, they'll be talking about, they'll stop accepting Rev 5 authorizations. Current Rev 5 CSPs are not current. There's no plans to force them to go 20X, but they are going to stop accepting net new Rev 5 authorizations. And they're currently planning for that towards the end of next year. Again, a lot of these timelines are still in flux.
And we should also add that when you're FedRAMP authorized, you have to keep reauthorizing. So if someone does have Rev 5, that will age out and they will have to do this, right?
Yeah, that's still kind of up in the air at this point.
Okay.
There's not, I don't want to say yes or no to that answer because the PMO has been very particular that they're not going to be forcing Rev 5 CSPs to move to 20x.
Okay.
But I want to bracket that by the benefits of 20x are pretty apparent. Once agencies start to adopt it, I could see agencies then requiring that their 20x their Rev 5 CSP providers to move into the 20x process just because it'll make it easier for them. And eventually, in the long term, it's going to be easier for everybody through 20x. So, Alex, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to call.
No, I was just going to agree with you. Yeah, if they adopt, the agencies adopt it, they're probably going to want everyone to move to it because that's going to be their new standard, I'd imagine. So,
yeah, for sure. All right, let's keep moving here. So I guess you kind of sort of started answering this, with my question, but so let's kind of just use this moment to talk about some of the differences, because I think a lot of us are familiar with Rev 5, in the FedRAMP world versus, what are the big rocks we're expecting to change? Because I know with the low pilot, there are some very defined changes and quite significant, I think, in many instances between, 5 and 20x. And then obviously we'll learn more as moderate. And I know you guys probably have some view into the moderate changes now that I don't, or a lot of other people don't. And then high is, TBD, but I'll let you two kind of take it from there. Like what are the big rocks? What are the differences we're seeing?
Yeah, Alex, I'd love for you to tackle kind of like the security side of things, because that's like your wheelhouse. How does it change or not change security?
I mean, security, it didn't really change for us because of our opinionated design. We already had these environments. So it was more just how do we take what we already have and automate and prove it automatically every day instead of once during a 2-week interview period.
Right.
But I'd say the biggest difference is it kind of you get constant validation on a lot of, because we have to check a lot of security controls for these KSIs. And it's harder for stuff to fall through the cracks. So I actually think it's more beneficial for the security teams or the engineering teams. Because like if Tanner, even though you don't have access for some reason, made a volume and it wasn't attached to something, that's actually one of our checks. So if that happened, a lot easier to find those gaps than maybe me just looking through and be like, oh, what's this volume sitting here? So
yeah, and I think to add to what Alex was saying, it didn't change for us, and I think that's been our advice to folks that are either in the Rev 5 space wanting to move into 20x, or are weighing whether they should pursue 20x or whether they should pursue Rev 5. Is that the level of, and even for if there's any agency folks listening out there too in the audience, that the level of security hasn't changed. The PMO has been very particular that like this shouldn't be easier from a lower level of security should be able to get through the process. That's not the goal with 20x. The goal with 20x is to remove the unnecessary red tape. So, for Rev 5, you had security controls, and it's kind of a bad thing to have a non-applicable control, or a control that you haven't implemented for various reasons, whether it be like a, operational requirement or anything like that. But with 20x, they're saying, for these KSI processes, for example, incident response. Incident response tabletops generally, I don't know of any examples that I can think of, but companies should be doing incident response tabletops or simulated exercises. That's just general security best practice. But if for some reason you have a business case to not do tabletop exercises or simulated exercises for whatever reason, then you don't have to. So, on the Rev 5 house, you'd have to do it's IR21, I believe. It's, don't quote me on the security control from 853, right. But one of the incident response control enhancements is doing simulated exercises. If you have a reason to not do that, there's not a good way to pursue that in the Rev 5 path. But on the 20x path, you can say as a part of your KSI validation narrative inside your trust center that you're saying, hey, I'm doing all these other things that might not be directly related to an 853 control, but it's related to how I build security into my processes or into my system. So that also says that maybe you've got some edge cases, but also maybe you have a lot of processes or security value that you're adding to your system that would never be seen in 853 because there's not a security control directly related to that process. So 800, the 20x process gives you the opportunity to get value and get credit for things that you might not get in Rev 5 just because it's not associated directly with a control. Because the KSIs say do X, Y, and Z. The PMO actually in a blog they released yesterday where they talked about consolidated rules 2026. Again, another thing we'll dive into later. Pete described, when I say Pete Waterman, director of FedRAMP PMO, he described the new KSI rule sets that are coming out as saying, you must paint your house, as an example. And then you take that and say, how are we painting our house? How do we get credit for all the ways that we're painting our house? Unless it prescribes a very specific requirement, how you're doing it, you have to build a good story. So that's why there's still that emphasis with the agency representation, because you need ATO for the federal contract. So, diving into the slide here, again, Rev 5 versus 20X, one major change is the difference between a document-heavy process and machine-readable automated processes. Machine-readable documentation is required for 20X. And when I say machine-readable, it's not even really a documentation set. It's a authorization package. So as you're running your KSI validations, which is your automation that proves you're doing what your KSI narrative says that you're doing, that has to be in a machine-readable and automated standpoint that can be provided to agency representation or to the PMO assessment team. And Rev 5 is actually, with the new changes coming out later as the year progresses, they're going to require Rev 5 processes to start moving into machine-readable documentation packages.
Nice.
So it's part of the balance improvements, which are these improvements that the PMO has started to release that are required for 20X. So they're just included as a part of the KSIs, but the balance improvements are opportunities for Rev 5 CSPs that aren't making the full transition to 20X to start reaping the benefits of, hey, the 20X folks get to do this. These are some processes that you can get to do if you decide to adapt to it. Think like significant change notification is a balance improvement where CSPs get the opportunity to, in the Rev 5 space, to stop doing an assessment for every significant change so long as they can build a good story around it. That's a process that's required for 20X personnel, but all Rev 5 CSPs have the opportunity, if they get their agency to approve of it, they can transition to that process and save a lot of time and a lot of money potentially. So if you're a Rev 5 CSP, definitely check out the balance improvements. Again, if you're pursuing 20X, you'll already see these because they're part of the AFR KSI family. But yeah, Alex talked a bit about the automated validation. So you're automatically validating your KSIs or your security status as opposed to going through like an annual review process. Also, the KSIs assist with your continuous monitoring controls, like checking your log sources. There's a AU2. One of the requirements for AU2 is that you're reviewing your log sources and making sure that you're getting logs from everything you should be. You have to do that annually. You probably should do that more than annually, just to be honest, from a security hygiene perspective. But the KSI that we have set up just goes and checks. And if we see any, streams where we're not getting logs, it'll fire an alert that gets ticketed, and then we'll go check it out.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of what I was getting at. Is like, you're supposed to do it once a year, but now KSI runs every night.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
you're actually getting way more data, way more information about your system than doing a once a year review or once every 6 months review.
Yeah, well, and the security, the human in me also realizes it's a good opportunity to keep personnel that are supporting these systems from feeling like the world is ending if like a finding comes up. A lot of times you go through your audit and you want it to be as clean as possible, and you should want it to be as clean as possible. But you're also like, hey, the security of the system is what's really important. The KSIs can help catch things and fix them before, quickly, as opposed to them saying, it just keeps a lot of like hand waving from being a potential risk because it's automated. You can't fight automation. But also if it's automated, it's going to be understood. They're going to find things more often than not. So things aren't the end of the world when they get found. So it keeps stress low, visibility is high, so stress is low. There's that trade-off as well. We already talked a little bit about the speed, the authorization there. The PMO in general has just gotten faster about their review processes. So the pilot review processes, we were kind of figuring out what it looked like as we went along, but the PMO has made it very clear that they're wanting to, provide the recommendation to the agencies, and then the agencies have whatever ATO process that they have And there's not, the documentation requirements are not so robust. It's more so, what is your security story? What is your KSI validations? And then, again, it's cloud native security. How can you automate your compliance and for your system as opposed to taking the compliance framework and adapting your system to fit it? You're taking the compliance framework and saying, how are we doing these things in this system we already have? And if you can't build a good enough story based off of the system you currently have, then you realize you have some things to change in your platform. So it's the best of both worlds in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. Holy cow, that was amazing. That was so good. I will say, just as like a practitioner perspective, I mean, FedRAMP has been around. It's been what, more than a decade at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it feels like it's been a decade, I think,
Yeah.
when you work on some of the paperwork. So this is really cool.
Yeah, there was I mentioned this in one of the community working groups that FedRAMP invited us to, but it was a quote from completely unrelated. It was a quote from my pastor about like life and like FedRAMP needing change. But the quote from my pastor was, when growing things, we want things to grow, and growing things change, and that's a good thing. So signs of change are typically signs of growth. So don't be afraid of change, because I know that's like there's a lot happening, and the PMO has been very clear that we're throwing major stones into the pond, and the pond has not had time for the ripples to die down and for it to kind of resettle. But once all this major change happens, the agency FedRAMP process will be so much better off for it. So
I agree. And let's talk about some of that change. So
Mhm.
I kind of threw this slide together. It doesn't have anything particularly useful on the slide, but more just to talk about kind of what are we kind of seeing in these different changes? Because I know the low pilot happened, and I feel like low has changed quite a lot, where there's, instead of having to focus on like using a STIG, for example, or even some of the federal compliance standards are saying, like, you use what works. If you have a SOC 2, use that evidence, go with that. Versus in the past, I think it was often seen as FedRAMP is like this completely separate thing from any of the other work you had done, and you had to do it all again and re-justify it again, and it was a giant pain in the butt. And you can tell me I'm off my rocker and I'm totally misrepresenting this, but that's kind of the view I have of what we're seeing. And I'm curious what you think, or what is happening in moderate, and what we think is going to happen in high.
Yeah, Alex,
Mhm.
I'll talk kind of about the overall like process from a business market driver, but I'd love for you to like get your insight, or I'll kick it to you to talk about like the the KSIs, and especially at the boundary. I know that's
Yeah,
something
that
we
was
talk about.
Yeah.
he was spot on with it, but
Yeah.
that's something that took us probably like a month to wrap our head around, just because we're used to the Red 5 way. But go ahead, Tanner.
So from a business driver perspective, I talked about it needed to be faster, it needed to be lower cost of effort to get into the market. So like, cool, that's great, but how? How does that change? So the 20x levels that are here is a transition from doing it's actually classes is the new term. So they switch terms a lot, but the idea behind this is that the PMO wants to move away from a like the data classification, like your FIPS data classification, from like your low data, moderate data, high data. They want to separate that definition with your FedRAMP certification level. So your certification class, the classes are A, B, C, D. A corresponds with low/LI, or excuse me, A corresponds with pilot. B corresponds with low impact SaaS. C is moderate, and then D is high. Again, part of the pilots, we've only been through the low and the moderate pilot. So their class D has not been defined yet. That is still to be determined a little bit more. But the idea with the classes, so your FedRAMP certification class, is it's the amount of data that you're sharing about your system security. It's not necessarily that, a pilot system might be just as secure as a moderate system from a general security perspective, but the amount of data that you're sharing about that system is much less in a pilot system than in a moderate system. So the PMO is trying to, separate those definitions, because in some instances, a agency that has FIPS high data, depending on the use case, they may not require the CSP that they're using go all the way to a Class D certification. Most likely, a lot of agencies are still going to require, high to Class D / old school high, just for the sake of visibility. CISO requirements are going to have CISO offices are going to have CISO office requirements. That's not changing, but they're trying to separate those. So the idea here is they want to streamline how quickly a CSP can get listed on the marketplace. So you talked about low. I want to clarify specifically the pilot certification process is designed to reuse your SOC 2 or map. That's the idea behind it. But you can either take your existing SOC 2 certification and map it to a subset of KSIs that have been defined by FedRAMP to say we're already doing a lot of these major items. And this is a kind of a marketing exercise. So you're proving that you're on your way, or you could be on your way to FedRAMP if the business case showed itself. But instead of spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go after all the way up to high to get listed on the marketplace, you spend, much less time, much less money, get listed on the marketplace, and then you're on the shelf as a pilot service, and then you can get online with an agency, and then you have a business case to actually pursue and provide that investment. And what that's doing is it's, cultivating, competitiveness, because a lot of smaller CSPs that have really great tools that just didn't have the resources to pursue FedRAMP because of the cost and time to entry, they're going to be available. So that's good for the industry at large. But then also, there's less money spent on something that may not ever come back with, return on investment. And then generally what the PMO has said with these classes is, Class A, subset of the KSIs get listed on the marketplace without an assessment. There's the self-assessment / mapping of your existing processes to a KSI. You get credit for that. You get listed on the marketplace after the PMO reviews it. You don't have to have a 3PAO come in and review. Class B, you're showing point-in-time data according to the low / LSS KSIs. Class C, you're starting to show data over time. So it's a couple more KSIs, then it's data over time. So it's more data about the KSIs that you have than you had in B. And then high, there, that's the pilot's scheduled for next year, but we'll continue to see how much more data or how more data gets shown as we're moving forward. But yeah, so that's the market / business side of things. But Alex, I'll let you dive into the security KSIs. How do you actually do it in practice?
Yeah, well, you mentioned there was a couple KSIs from low to moderate. Those couple are a doozy. He was understating it a little bit, but for low, it's more, do you have this enabled? Are you using VPCs? Something like that. It's something you can show and check and be like, yes, we're using this. For moderate, they throw in some more boundary defining, or not defining, I guess, defiance KSIs, where it took us a long time for us to figure out because we were so stuck in Rev 5 and how our AWS organization is our boundary essentially. But it's a lot of business metrics and how you handle business decisions. Do executives support us going through this 20x process? So you have to go out and kind of think outside of the box for some of these, but it's things most businesses are doing, but you just don't think about it when you're thinking about the boundary, right? And then,
and historically, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, that when we thought of the FedRAMP boundary, we thought in the boundary was very, very technical, right? We didn't worry about some of the, we'll say, squishy controls, which are things about I think, threat modeling or support from the business or whatever, which is, it's super important, but it's definitely not
because we were scratching our heads. We were like, we can't show this. We can't pull this from our GitHub. GitHub's not in the boundary. And then I think Tanner was on one of our review calls with the PMO. They were like, guys, you can just go get that stuff. And we're like, oh, we can? And we're like, oh, cool. This makes it so much easier because we already do all this stuff outside of boundary. We scan before code enters boundary and all that stuff, but it's not, we were like, oh, we can't touch that stuff. So
yeah. When it's, like you said, Josh, some of the out of boundary controls, like the business support, are very important. And it was kind of a duh moment for us when in one of those workshops, what Alex is referring to the workshops, each of the pilot participants, as we were going through the pilot, we actually did workshops and went through the KSIs with the PMO, and we got a little bit of insight to, what is the point or the spirit of the KSI, because they were still being, the track was getting laid down as you're riding the train.
Sometimes the track was moving.
Sometimes it was moving.
Yeah.
So and for both the PMO and for us. So, the PMO was able to get insight from us to support their development of the finalized versions of the KSIs. And then we also were able to, like Alex said, say, hey guys, this is completely different than what the boundary guidance is allowed in Rev 5. So the example that always sticks out to me is when they said, hey, do you have a checking the credit card that pays for your AWS bills to see if that credit card is expired? And it's like, well, no, that's out of boundary. And it's like, well, what happens if that credit card expires? A lot of really bad stuff happens, Yeah. So that was some eye-opening experience. Even like security training, we don't have time to get into all of them, but like, persistently reviewing the effectiveness of investment is the best summary that I can provide. That was language that was added to a lot of your back office controls, like persistently review the effectiveness of your security training, your developer training, your role-based training, as opposed to the AT controls that basically say, are you doing training? Yeah. And does it include insider threat? So you're able to actually prove, or at least, build some correlations between the value of your security training, because it is important. You can't prove that security, if I take my security training, I'm not going to fail a fish exercise, but I'm probably less likely to fail a fish exercise if I do my training. So you can at least gather some data and some metrics, even if you can't prove some things. And there's still value in that, even if there's not a, empirical proof that you can provide. That's
a good example, because there's more than just that. I mean, they added that persistently review to, I want to say, most of the, like you said, Josh, squishy controls.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, and as you mentioned earlier, you don't want to have as much documentation. You want to have machine readable stuff, but it's like, okay, you have the documentation, but they don't really want to see that you have it. It's not a checkbox. They're like, okay, how do you know this is good documentation? Mm-hmm. How do you know it's valid? How do you know like it's useful? So that's what you actually have to prove. It's like, yeah, we have training, but is that training worth anything? You tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, it goes back like anything that's not in your architecture. Like you said, Alex, is this turned on? Like you can prove that guard duty is turned on. Yep. You can prove that config is turned on.
Those are the easy ones.
Those are the easy ones. And those are the internal to the boundary. But then you also think of like operational controls, like incident response. That was the one that jumped out at me when you were talking about the persistently reviewing the effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, yeah, you've got an incident response process. How do you prove that it's good enough? Or how do you prove that you're following it? Having a tabletop exercise in your appendix, sure, that's, your latest report in the appendix of your incident response plan. Okay, that provides some value, but that's not, that just shows that you're following some process. If you're only doing it annually, but you're not taking the data and saying, hey, what's the, or did you check that report to make sure it's got everything? Or are you just doing that annually when your assessor looks at it? So, you're able to build in your procedures into your like operations, like your GRC operations. So like build those checks into your tickets instead of doing a Word document for your report, build it into some a ticket. Then you can reach out to that ticketing tool and say, for every single time we had an incident that was considered a legit, a true positive, did we capture our recovery time objective? Did we capture our recovery point objective? Did we do lessons learned? Did we confirm that the ticket, like all the tickets have been closed afterwards? So,
and it's not even for actual, it's for our incident test too.
Yeah. And for incident tests, you can do the same thing for all of your, good hygiene type controls.
Yeah. And then our check goes a step further, and to make sure we don't forget to do this, it's like, hey, if there hasn't been a ticket in, I think it's 30 days or something, like you haven't tested anything, you're like, oh, we're failing now.
Right.
So you guys got to keep doing it, get into a cadence of having these, doing lessons learned and making the process better. That's really what they want to see. They want to see how you're bettering your internal processes and your boundary processes as well.
Yeah. And like Alex said, how do you better yourself? That is the, one of the big changes is if you need to change your validation, you still go through change control to change it like you would anything else, any other configuration in your environment. But part of that persistently review is say, hey, we originally designed this KSI and, 99 or 100% is probably not achievable or really sustainable, nor is it worth the investment to be sustainable. So then you can get, change to your KSI let's say it's a threshold check for your past fail. And then, you can pivot as you need to, or you can say, hey, maybe we don't need to do a tabletop exercise every 30 days. Maybe we could do that quarterly. So then you can do that quarterly. And you can just pivot as business cases come up. If the security threat landscape of the world changes and the agency CISOs like puts out a mandate, everybody needs to be doing exercises, twice as often now, then you can pivot. You go in and update that automation and you do that. But you don't have to wait until there's a, net new, you don't have to wait till Rev 6 comes out, for example, to force people to do that. You have the opportunity and the responsibility. I think it's going to kind of determine who's really serious about security, because it's really as secure as you want to make it. Yeah. And it's not just dependent on what security controls are required for your baseline.
Yeah, and you don't even have to start out at 100%. You're saying, if 100% is not attainable, but like if you start out at 5%, and then next year you can look back and we're like, oh, we're up to 20% now. Mm-hmm. That's showing you're taking an interest and you're growing, making it better. So you don't have to start out with a perfect product or a perfect solution. Mm-hmm. You just have to show you're working towards a better solution.
Yep.
Awesome. So kind of on that note, we have a question that came in from Curtis. It says, how does 20x and KSIs change the 3PAO process? In our current assessment process, we are still required to show live evidence, which consists of browsing the AWS UI or running commands on Linux/Windows and taking screenshots. This is very time consuming and only covers a small percentage of assets and does not cover all controls.
Oh man, Curtis said the bad word. He said screenshots.
Yeah.
So sorry, we're giving you a hard time, Curtis. That's how everybody does it in the Rev 5 space. Alex, you are the guy that has to do those screen shares. I'll let you talk through that.
It's changed a bunch. So I'll just give a little background in case everyone doesn't know. But if you go through a Rev 5 audit right now, Tanner hits me up and is like, "Hey man, I need you for 4.5 hours today to share your screen so we can gather evidence." And I'm like, "Oh boy, can't wait." But going through the pilot, I mean, we still had a 3PAO, but the role kind of changed. Instead of just being there to see it with your own eyes and take the screenshots, it was more just validating our processes and be like, okay, we're going to look at all of our automation, all of our Lambdas. So they kind of have to be more technical, because if you don't know, pretty much they're making sure that like our code doesn't output everything is all good every day in a print statement. So they're actually validating that what we're saying we're doing, we're actually doing, and it's not fake evidence or we're lying about anything. And then once they do that, like, okay, we can trust the evidence we're outputting to them in that machine readable, like Tanner was saying earlier. Mm-hmm. And then actually be like, okay, does this control meet what they need to meet? So they still have to know what the requirements are, but they kind of have to be a little bit more technical to kind of understand the full automation flow of the KSIs.
Yeah. It was refreshing really going through it, because, and I don't mean that in a sense of like, the 3PAOs were not easy to work with. I guess the process has not ever been easy for a Rev 5 audit. And the key, like Alex said, was, they're not validating the evidence that's coming. They're not like checking the evidence and saying, they're doing XYZ because they showed me this screenshot, or their validation output pulls out this cloud service or this cloud configuration check. What they're doing is validating that our validation processes are doing what they say they're doing. And then they're not looking at those validations in a vacuum. They're looking at, for each KSI, one really important thing to understand is that you're probably not going to validate one KSI with one check. You're probably going to have to prove you're doing multiple things to prove that you're following one KSI. And I don't know that we even have any KSIs in our boundary that have just one check. There might be a few.
Maybe some of the training ones.
Yeah.
Because we do like one bracket training. Mm-hmm. It's all encompassing. So I think that one might be the only one. But yeah, like because the KSIs are vague enough to let you do what you think you can do to get credit. Like Tanner was saying earlier, like, okay, we can do this a little bit differently because we do things a little bit differently. So there's multiple components. So I think even some of our checks have like 10 or 11 things for just one requirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're looking at each of the KSIs and saying, yes, this KSI validation is doing what it's saying it's doing. And that makes sense. But they're also looking at all of those validation checks for a single KSI. And from a security perspective, the Rev 5 baseline is not applicable to 20x, but the KSIs are inspired by the Rev 5 baseline, very much so. And we even started by doing a mapping of the KSIs when they first came out. It's like that was the best way we knew to think about it. Let's compare it to what we've got, see if there's any that we think we should probably go ahead and start prepping for, because we think maybe the PMO missed it, or maybe it's coming out in an update. But they look at them in a macro sense and say, hey, this is passable. This is a good security story, not just that the validation is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So all of that gets put together. They basically get access to a private view of your trust center, which is where you're gathering all your evidence or your validations. They get the assessor gets a private view. And when we say public versus public view, they get to see what you're checking and the status, whereas the private view actually provides details on how you're checking it, what evidence it's pulling back. Like, for example, checking that a WAF is configured with geo restriction. The public view is going to say, here's the KSI, here's this sub-check for that KSI that says is our WAF configured for geo restriction outside of the US, for example. Then it'll have like a green check or red X. The private view is going to show what automation is run in the cloud boundary to check that WAF. It's going to see what WAF it hit and what the return for that API call was. Then the 3PAO provides their output and basically says, like, it's a narrative they put together, their write-up, just like they would on a security assessment report or a risk exposure table, and say, this is their security story. Checked a bunch of other KSIs that are adjacent to this one, and this is their overall security story. And the way that we worked with our 3PO is we actually had our 3PAO provide that as details into our private view of the trust center. So every year as we go through our assessment, that will be updated. So we'll see who the 3PAO assessor was, their name, their comments, when they made those comments. And then that private view will also be accessed by, customers or agency representatives as well. So they're available for the agency to see, hey, this was the 3PAO's comments on it as well. Not only did they get the PMO feedback, but this is like a detailed look at what the 3PAL said. So we hope that answers your question, Curtis. I know that was a lot.
That's an amazing answer. So let me ask about the trust center. What is the trust center? Is that something that's run by the FedRAMP folks, or is that something you're running in your infrastructure?
It's something we're running on our infrastructure. So we talked about XB40. So think about your cloud platform, or your cloud service. Ours is called XB40. It's really a security compliance platform that's designed to help CSPs go through the FedRAMP journey. You don't want to dive into that too much. So, we have XB40, that's our service. And then we have Trust Center, which is basically a website, just like you would think of a Trust Center for any other, service that you're providing, to where you can go in and say, what is the status of this product that I'm using? And nice. The public view of our Trust Center, it'll pull from XB40, specifically from Command Center, which is our GRC tool hosted within XB40. And it'll pull the status of our KSIs. It'll show a live status, or the last time they were run. You'll be able to see KSI by KSI or KSI family by family, what the status is. Your current pass percentage, current automation percentage, et cetera, et cetera. There'll also be, we have a Trust Center repository, so it'll actually pull like a redacted version of our machine-readable package that will share, like, hey, this is the status. If you want to review this with a machine-readable tool, or a tool that uses machine-readable data, then go check their status. You can do a run, and if they want to check for a specific KSI without using the UI, they can use a tool. And then there's an opportunity on that Trust Center to authenticate into the private view, and then private view will add more value. You'll be able to see what is if something fails, what is the evidence that it's actually pulling from the system. What are the commands that are actually being run in the AWS CLI to check for that data?
I think the easiest way to explain it is our application is in our AWS environment, and this is just a window into how the application's doing from a public view. And then, like he said, if you authenticate, you get to see more information, more detailed information about it.
Yeah, sure. So the PMO, and that's not just a us thing. The PMO, that's part of your new collaborative Conmon process with your agencies, with your customer, basically your FedRAMP customers, to say, you need a trust center. It could be an existing trust center you already have for your commercial work, and there's like a new page for your FedRAMP service. But we've developed it, and we created a new one specifically for XB40, and it shows our current status, like Alex was saying. But it's the window into your service. So you don't have to be like an end user of the product itself. Maybe you're the AO that doesn't use the product themselves, but they still need to be able to see the current status of the system. And it's also a tool to help support your collaborative Conmon process, which is collaborative conmon is the changes that they're making for FedRAMP 20x between Rev 5 and 20x for your like monthly, conmon reviews, like your POEM review, your inventory review with the customer. It's transitioning that to more like a quarterly review with the customer with some new requirements. Nothing we have to dive into today.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a bit of a self-serving. I'm a huge vulnerability nerd. And so this one, I just copy and pasted the text from the FedRAMP 20x website. But I'm really excited about this because now they're talking about using automation for vulnerability detection and reporting, which feels like absolutely fantastic to me. And Alex, I suspect this one's going to be in your wheelhouse. So like,
Yeah,
what have you
absolutely.
seen? Like, you don't have to be excited. It's okay because I know most people hate this stuff. But like this one, like I'm like, we're finally doing it.
Yeah. So for us, just to give a little background, we actually already had an internal automation that gathered all of our like POEM items, so from all our different scanners. So for this, we use the same automation to just pulled in, like, we use Nessus. We're going to API, pull the latest Nessus scan. We're at AWS Shop, so we use Inspector to scan a lot of things. So then we go pull all the Inspector scans, and then we combine them and dedupe them. But the biggest change, in my opinion, or from working on the automation process, was the way you score it is completely different. And you have to treat every vulnerability independently. So before in the POEMs I've seen, you could put like, okay, here's the CVE 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever. Okay, it has 10 effective resources. You just have the 10 effective resources in that column or field, whatever you want to call it. You have to, now all those are going to be individual items because of the new scoring system. So you can kind of you don't have to follow like a low, medium, high anymore. There is still a remediation timeline depending on, I believe it's in levels, right, Tanner?
Yep.
So there's is it 2 through 5?
Yeah, it's in 2 through 5.
2 through 5. And depending on, it's kind of like a matrix. So you have like your N2 column, and then you classify your asset. So if it's publicly accessible, that's going to change it completely into a different category. So if it's publicly accessible, you're going to have to remediate it way faster. And I think some of the timelines is like 1 day or 2 days.
Yeah, like I think it's for high N5 is like a half a day or something like that.
Crazy. So some of the timelines are way more tight. Some of them are way more leeway. For example, I think if the way we do our classifications, we're still using the CVSS scores for low, medium, high, and then we're putting those into that matrix. And then the real difference is it known exploitable and is it public? Because the way the matrix is that the further right you go, the more strict. And so it goes from, okay, low, medium, high, essentially. And then the next column is it Kev? Okay, if it is Kev, here's your timeline. Okay, is it internet reachable? Here's your timeline. Is it both of those things? That's where you get like you have 12 hours to remediate.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of change the way you think about scanning because you're going to have an automated way to determine if something's public or not, right? Either via routes or maybe if you keep an inventory, like we have an automated inventory that we use, so we can just tag that in that inventory as public. And that's how we can kind of pull in, okay, this is a public system, so it's going to always fall into this category. It's basically just is changing the way you kind of think about vulns, because you can't just dedupe them and just look at, okay, this is a low, I have, what is it, Tanner, 30 days or 90 days for a low right now? 180. Yeah. So you kind of have to think out of it as more asset level than the actual CVE level.
Yeah, which I mean, at the end of the day,
it makes plenty of sense.
It makes sense, yeah. Because I mean, if I have my web app and my web app has a Kev on it, that's going to be a lot
way more impactful than something nothing connects to has a Kev.
Right.
Yeah, like
it's never going to get exploited. That really doesn't matter.
Let's say like our Nessus box had a Kev, and we go, oh yeah, okay, cool. We don't have to scan with Nessus again for a little bit. Let's take that offline for a little bit until we can fix it. Versus our web app, we got like, hey, you're gonna have to work late today. Let's get this remediated.
And that's actually another good point. Is you don't necessarily. It's not, hey, this has to be patched by this day. You can actually.
It's mitigated.
You can mitigate it. So let's say, Tanner, that Nessus was public. Okay, so it's got a public Kev. Oh, we have 1 day to remediate this now. Well, guess what? We make it not public anymore. That puts it into a different
Yeah.
tier.
Yep.
So you can kind of shift around based on, severity of the system.
Yeah.
Which I think is the way it needs to be, because as everyone knows,
yeah.
some systems are way more important, way more vulnerable than other systems.
Yeah, it goes back to your business impact. How does it affect your business, and what is reasonable? Again, we're a security shop, so patch your systems. Like, we're not going to recommend, if you can patch it in that day, patch it in that day. But
but if you can't,
there's a little bit more flexibility, and the old like risk adjustment process, or your deviation request process with like risk adjustments, operational requirements. This is really just an expansion of that into the actual like triage of your vulnerabilities, as opposed to, you have your CVSS score and then you say, oh, well, this is, we need to risk adjust that, because it's not really, it's not internet reachable. I mean, that's the process you do for your deviation requests, is you go through and like look at the other factors outside of your CVSS score, and then you adjust your vulnerability accordingly on your POAM. Now you're just doing that as a part of your vulnerability discovery, because you probably should. It's just more data. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, it's more data about your vulnerabilities that gives you more context on how to protect your system without burning hours unnecessarily.
Exactly. Yes. And we've all been through that, right? Where you've got, like you guys were saying, critical finding on some crappy system, and now we've all spent a couple days dealing with, the dumbest thing in the world. But
when you could have been spent on something way more productive, way more impactful.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's keep moving. We're almost there. We talked about this a little bit, but I feel like let's make this one quick. We've got, 8 minutes to go. Let's do like lightning round answers, right? Like agency sponsorship. So the new FedRAMP doesn't need an agency sponsor to start, right? Do we know what medium or moderate and high are going to look like in this regard?
Yeah, so I can answer this one pretty quickly. To get your program certification. So program certification is your certification directly from FedRAMP. Up through moderate, as of right now, you can do that without a sponsor. That is still to be determined for high. I do want to caveat this, that program certification does not constitute an ATO from an agency. So in other words, to secure that government contract with the agency, they still need to provide the ATO for the agency to leverage your system. No sponsor required for a FedRAMP up to moderate / Class C certification. Class D, we'll see how that goes during the pilot next year.
Which is awesome. And I'll just say, from my past experience, finding the sponsor was usually like the hardest part of FedRAMP.
Absolutely. So, it was in a majority of the cases for us / our customers. Yeah,
for sure. All right. This is the last, I guess, slide of content we have. And this is just a picture of the JSON document that FedRAMP put in their GitHub repository, which I also think is like awesome that we have, the FedRAMP folks putting things into GitHub where it's public. But so this, I'll let you two argue over who should maybe answer it. But this is just kind of an example. Like, when we're talking about machine readable, like, this isn't one of those, it's a file that a computer can sort of parse. Like, this is genuinely not fit for human consumption, right? And the things we're going to be moving around in this new universe.
Yeah, it needs to follow a schema. So one of the things we actually provide on our trust center is, okay, we can give you the machine readable data, but if you don't know what you're looking at, it's not really helpful. So we actually provide example schema of like, okay, this is how we format it. So then you can take that and plug it into whatever you're going to use to read it.
Yeah, no schema for screenshots, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely not. And the thing that I want the audience to take away from this is, like, don't think of like just your SSP. Don't think of your doc package. Think of that authorization package. So like the proof that you are following the KSIs. Think how nice would it be if you could take all those screenshots, Curtis, that you asked about earlier, and that was available in a JSON document that, instead of, in a massive SharePoint folder that, is thrown together for the audit, and then you don't clean it up afterwards. So then it's hard to refer to it the next year. I've done that before, because I've done audits year over year. And I'm always like, I know I grabbed this last year. What was it? Yeah, label it better.
Yeah, label it better.
Yeah, you don't have any time to label it during the audit.
Yeah. Screenshot 1. It's screenshot 5, not screenshot 1.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. But yeah, so think about your authorization package, not just like the SSP documentation package. So Yeah. Think about taking all of your evidence and putting it in code as opposed to just your SSP.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess so that's not something I'd even thought of at this point, Tanner, is like the reusability aspect. Because you're right. I remember year to year to year, and especially you're doing this stuff once a year. So then you spend a week just looking back at what you did and trying to remember what all this crap even was. Like, where
Yeah,
did I get this from even?
We kind of realized, FedRAMP 20x announced back in March of last year, and it took us a little bit to kind of say like, what even is this? So we realized that we were starting to do that. Some of our like Alex, Alex got sick of Tanner asking him to come on a call half a day for 3 days in a week every year. So the engineers would say, oh, hey, I know we've done this before. And they actually put together a little run book that said, hey, here's the API command that you can run, give that output to the PM and tell them to stop bothering you. And then we started to just put those together and we realized, this is exactly what 20x is all this stuff that we've been thinking about, but when the day-to-day is coming, it's hard to do. So
yeah. I've got a quick question here from David. It says, will there be any crossover between FedRAMP and GovRAMP in the future?
That is a great question, David. So the FedRAMP to GovRAMP, FedRAMP has been very clear throughout this process that the FedRAMP PMO at GSA only has direct control over how FedRAMP process is going to work. So your question makes me think of not just GovRAMP, but CMMC, DoD authorization. The DoD authorization process relies pretty heavily on FedRAMP Ready. And part of this 20x effort is them retiring FedRAMP Ready entirely. And there's a bunch of people that are, looking at the DoD space as an example and saying, what the crap's happening with DoD? Same thing is happening at GovRAMP. They're asking, hey, if FedRAMP is going to stop, except, the GovRAMP baseline is very similar to the FedRAMP baseline, but if FedRAMP baseline is moving to 20x, how is GovRAMP going to respond? We're still waiting to see how that looks like as well. We hope that it's, it'll be in the future exactly how FedRAMP Rev 5 and GovRAMP works, where, if you go through the FedRAMP process, you can take your FedRAMP accreditation and use it for GovRAMP to make it much easier. And from a marketing perspective, it's worth the investment to go all the way to FedRAMP as well. So you have opportunities in both parts. I wish I had more details for you, David, but we're waiting to see how GovRAMP is going to adapt as well, just like everybody else. And the same goes if anybody here is questions about like CMMC and DoD/DOW. Same applies for those. We're very, very curious to see how they're going to pivot because FedRAMP is used in a lot of those spaces.
Well, and CMMC just changed pretty drastically last year. It was right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we get to do it again.
Awesome.
Right.
Yeah. And David, thank you for supporting Wilkes Community College. We really appreciate it. Saw that comment in the chat.
That's
nice. Awesome.
Yes. All right. We have a very long looking question from Bruce. So let's see. I'm just going to read this quick and we'll see if it, just an observation. I always find it strange and curious to question Kanban. More stringent reliant Kanban has always been required, not just implemented. Yeah, I guess I'll let you guys talk about that. Like Kanban. What do you think?
So, we're just reading through the question.
Not stringent enough. Yeah, it's kind of long. But I think that's the gist of it.
Yeah. So Bruce, I don't know that I see a question here per se, but I think agreed. This is really the goal with 20x. Like Alex is saying, having visibility to see, hey, continuous monitoring, you really take those words for what they genuinely mean. That means that you should always have visibility. It shouldn't be that, some processes are done, some reviews are done quarterly, some reviews are done annually, some reviews are done every month. And then you have 24/7 SOC that's monitoring like logs for alerts and that kind of stuff. But, automation, there should be automation in place. That's how you have good security hygiene. So sounds like you and Pete over at the PMO would get along, Bruce.
Awesome.
Thank you for your comment. That's absolutely right.
Excellent. All right. We're out of time. This has been a ton of fun. I want to thank you both. Thank you, InfusionPoints. It's been a treat. I've learned an amazing amount, which is the best. And thank you everyone for attending. We truly appreciate it. And thank you very much. And we'll have the email with the slides and the video and all that stuff coming. So wonderful. Shazane, I think we can wrap this one up.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone. You've all done brilliantly, and that was very insightful. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.